Welcome to the BWI Daily Edition, ending the week here on a Friday with a fun guest, Anthony Treash from PFF. I cite PFF stats on almost every single show here on the BWI Daily Edition, so going right to the source to get some information on Penn State's seniors and players that have a bright future in the NFL, and a couple that maybe they're up in the air. So PFF Anthony Treash, PFF Anthony on Twitter is with us to discuss those guys. Anthony, how you doing?
I'm doing great, man. How you doing?
I am doing well. We had you on at the beginning of the season, and you had some not so positive things to say about Sean Clifford that ended up bearing out, I think, pretty accurately once the full season was put into context. So going into a critical offseason for Sean Clifford, what do you think his future is, and what do you think his future should be as far as his decision to go to the NFL or come back for a sixth year?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends what perspective you're looking at it from. If you're in Penn State's shoes, you probably kind of want to, move on just a little bit and, start the next era of Penn State football. Just because Sean Clifford has kind of shown what he is in this past year, showed that. Penn State finishes 7-5. Sean Clifford, the same exact passer that he's always been, very, struggles under pressure significantly. I thought he did fared better in a clean pocket, but at the end of the day, he is limited what he can do from a downfield passing perspective. The one game I will give him props and kudos to, the Auburn game, I thought he played exceptionally well. I also thought the game plan was pretty conservative, but he executed it, didn't make many mistakes, and led Penn State there. But at the end of the day, Penn State, I don't think is going to get to that next level with Sean Clifford under center. And so from Penn State's perspective, it's probably best to go ahead and start that next era. From Sean Clifford's perspective, if he wants to keep on continuing, he should probably return to Penn State because I'm not sure if he's going to have a better opportunity elsewhere.
When it comes to one of the things that you keyed on outside of the play under pressure in a clean pocket, which was as dramatic of a split I've seen in the PFF grades from any quarterback, not just at Penn State, but in the nation this year, where he was an elite 90-level passer from a clean pocket and then bottom 5 in college football when under pressure. Another thing we talked about was the big-time throws, those game-changing plays. Where did he rank in that aspect? Because that was another area you said that he didn't generate a lot of that in the past. Did he get better at that? Is that an area where he took some step forward, or how did that meet out in the end?
Yeah, I mean, he definitely improved, and it's also important to look at, when those kind of occurred. So he had 20 for the season. 3 of them came against Villanova, which was his highest graded performance of the season from a passing perspective. So it's a little inflated. You don't really want to put too much against it, going up against Nova. That's why, through the first 4 games, I will say Sean Clifford played, I would say, a little bit above expectation. But again, you look at the defenses he faced, with Ball State and Nova, you get a little concerned, even though that Auburn performance was pretty good. And then we started to see the true Sean Clifford. And I do think that, it was just very hot and cold this year from that perspective. So while he did get better, he didn't really kind of come in the moments where he truly needed it. And it was pretty spotty all year long. Multiple games with 0 there, 1 or fewer. Just about half the games, I believe, have 1 or fewer for the season or for the game, which you really don't want to see. And you pair that with just about, the same amount of turnover-worthy plays down the stretch. And, that's when you kind of get the middling quarterback play there. So I think he's just always kind of been, the guy. So the big thing about the clean pocket versus under pressure stuff, I do think that a large portion of the clean pocket stuff was just kind of the conservative nature that they're facing. Because, I mean, he had a 7.9 average depth of target. And I don't want to discount the 90.7 pass grade he had when clean, because that is very, very good. But he was helped out just a little bit, just because it was very, safe offensive play. Not a lot of room for negatively graded throws there, because a little pitch and catch action for most of the time. And then when the under pressure play came, that's when you started to see the Sean Clifford moments of trying to do a little bit too much and get very rattled when the play starts to break down. So he can play within the structure of the offense. But when things kind of start to not go as planned, that's when you start to see it. So I do think that at the end of the day, we did see some improvement from Sean Clifford, and that's when you kind of see the senior kind of rise there. But this is kind of, I think, the ceiling that we're seeing with him. Like I mentioned earlier, it's only going to get Penn State so far with this ceiling. And so that's a little bit of a concern, and that's why I would probably, if it were, my decision, I would kickstart the next era and develop that next passer to really take this program to the next level, because I do think that there is opportunity to do so over the next year or two.
So when it comes to context for PFF grades, the injury against Iowa, where Penn State is up, I believe, 17-3 or something at that point, and then he goes out of the game, and they score one more field goal for the rest of the game, injured presumably for the rest of the season. How does ancillary things like that work into the data or your evaluation of players when looking into that stuff?
Yeah, so I mean, from the pure play-by-play grading aspect of it, the injuries, the level of competition they're faced, that doesn't really go into it. And so that's just something for people like myself, my other colleagues, whether it's Seth Galina, Trevor Sikkema, Austin Gale, Mike Renner, whoever, when looking at this data, just knowing, the situation that they were in. So if someone is banged up and they probably are, 50-50 on whether or not they should actually even be on the field and they perform poorly because they might be hurt, it's just important to take note of that. And so that does play a part into it. And it's the same thing too, why it's like every single year, the first month of the year, I always say, be very, very careful on, just flat out saying this quarterback or this player, it might be the best at the position this year, big breakout year, because you're facing a lot of easy competition. You're getting the non-conference games where you're paying the other program to come to you and play for an easy win, to help their program out financially. So, it's just stuff to take note of in situations like that, because at the end of the day, when we're grading these quarterbacks, you never can give a little pass there. Maybe this guy's got a shoulder injury he's going through. You can't really just help their grading just a little bit because of that. And so it's just something to take note of when you're explaining the data to other people and putting it all into context.
So, what is kind of the big picture question of Penn State going forward? If Sean Clifford is not a driver of success for Penn State, is 7-5 a reflection of the team that was put on the field this year? And if you were a Penn State fan, knowing that Sean Clifford is going to operate the offense within the structure and really not elevate anything, what would you expect, I guess, to be a realistic outlook if Sean Clifford will come back next year? I'm not asking you to pick 10-2 or 11-1 or 7-5, but like, what's the range of outcome do you think from Penn State as that they can expect, kind of with that in mind?
Yeah, I mean, I would say just about the same kind of exact team that they had this year, right? In that just above 500, maybe they get 8 or 9 wins. But at the end of the day, you want to be competing for national titles. You want to be competing for the Big Ten title, even the Big Ten East division. Just getting to the title game would be huge. And Sean Clifford, I don't think, is going to get them to that level. And so if he were to return, I would kind of expect the same type of Penn State team that we saw this year. One that from offensively, you're going to struggle a little bit, from a passing perspective with Sean Clifford. And so that's what I would expect.
Well, let's talk about some more positive things for Penn State football fans. I don't want you to be enemy number one for Penn State football for the next 8 months because it's a sensitive subject. So let's go on to some players that performed really well, and the guys I think we're going to focus on for the majority of today as far as their futures beyond Penn State into the NFL, starting with Jaquan Brisker. Where does he rank among safeties this year in both PFF grade and your personal perspective of play and production?
Yeah, I mean, before we get into those, because I will say Drew Allar, the five-star true freshman, if he were to come in, I think my opinion would be skewed just a little bit, because I do think he offers more upside, and I'm never the one to advocate for true freshmen to start at the Power 5 level at quarterback specifically. But he looks different. He does look different. So if he's in there, I would probably boost my expectations for them, just because I do think that there is reason to believe Ohio State might take another step back with losing some of the talent they have, and even Michigan too. They have a very difficult decision to make at quarterback next year, which right now we're focused on them in the playoff. But for 2022, Cade McNamara, JJ McCarthy, two different quarterbacks, I think that would, the ceilings are very different there. But at the end of the day, going back to what you said, Jaquan Brisker, I lost my train of thought, went off on a tangent there. I think he's a first round player. This year from a grading perspective, he was near the top of the Power Five safeties in terms of coverage performance. He did take a step back in the way of tackling and run defense because he played closer to the line of scrimmage, more snaps in the box, and you'll see that. But I don't think that's a significant issue moving forward. But I do think from a coverage perspective, he is one of the best coverage safeties in college football, and I would expect him to kind of be the same type of player at the NFL level. And that's why I think he's a first-round guy.
Well, when you look at his 2-year production as well, where
Yeah.
he was an elite run defender, elite tackler in 2020, missed only one tackle, and then, as you mentioned, was used differently this year for a variety of reasons. Is he a complete safety, in your opinion?
I mean, I wouldn't expect him, come in there and be the number one safety in the NFL. But I do think that, with the instincts that he has, specifically, that's what really jumps out to me. I do think that that's the most important trait that you could have, in a safety at any level of football, because that's when you start to see those high level plays being made. And we've seen Jaquan Brisker make those not just this year, but the year before. Because, like you said, he's been very productive, ever since he came in there from JUCO. So I do think that he is kind of, I wouldn't say the absolute complete safety going to be an all-pro Hall of Famer. But I do think that with the instinct of play that he has, I think he's a first-round player, and I think he could be a very high-quality starter in the league.
What sort of positional flexibility, I guess, how would you use him if you were a defensive coordinator? Because as you mentioned, when PJ Musfer went down with an injury, he played way more snaps in the box than he did previously. So he was kind of a fix-all, a duct tape, a Band-Aid for Penn State this year on defense. What do you think his best strengths are with that anticipation as a run defender, as a coverage player, as a slot defender? What do you think his best abilities are, and where would he be accentuated?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he should be limited to the box at all whatsoever. Kind of what we saw this year, like you said, a higher rate of snaps in the box. I do think that he is a versatile player that can play really anywhere. And you go back to what he did, back in 2020, and the time that we saw him, more snaps at free safety than anywhere. I mean, he really did thrive there. And even back in 2019, when we saw him in some capacity at free deep safety, he was fantastic. So I do think and that is a testament to, like I said, his instinctive play, what I've been kind of hammering here. That's the biggest thing, and I think why he's been so successful. And so I think he can be a versatile player. He can, I think, can go at any position there. Primarily focusing on him on around deep, getting him in a too high structure at times. With kind of the way the NFL is trending too. We're seeing more diverse coverage schemes, more disguises. I think those are the football buzzwords of this year. You think of the Kansas City Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes gets the too high structure and all of
Yeah.
that. But yeah,
Everyone's
it's
not
true.
playing cover three and putting four people in the box and having basically a
Right.
fourth linebacker as a safety.
Exactly. Unless
Yeah.
you're the Las Vegas Raiders and Gus Bradley still sticking to his guns, playing the same, Seahawk cover three read stuff.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you're getting more diverse, and I think that's when you see players like Jaquan Brisker, I think, really rise and showcase their talents because he can be diverse, he can be versatile and everything there. So I think with the way the NFL is trending, Jaquan Brisker is the type of player that teams should really want on the back end there. So those really diverse defenses and schemes, I think will cover Jaquan Brisker's ability.
And Penn State has never had a first-round defensive back. Still blows my mind every time I bring that fact up. And he would be the first. And if he's not, then I do believe there is some sort of fix in, and there's some college scouting going on based on where you come from. That NFL teams like, oh no, you can't do that. Another guy coming from a different college to Penn State, Arnold Ebiketie, one of PFF's favorite transfers in the offseason. I think Penn State with Derek Tangelo and Arnold Ebiketie had your best or one of your best PFF transfer classes. Were even you surprised by how well he played at Penn State this year?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to like toot my own horn or anything, but I was all in on Evakede when he was at Temple in 2020. What the snaps that he got at Temple, they were high level, man. It looked special. And when I found out he was transferring to Penn State, I was stoked because he's getting a good opportunity to be a part of a very good defense and step in for players, with very high expectations. Losing Adafe Owe and Shaka Tony and bringing in a guy like Arnold Evakede, he lived up to expectations. I mean, the way he can win with his hands is special. In this past year, it was very much the production that we saw him flash back in 2020 with Temple. I mean, that year in 2020. He had an 88.3 pass rush grade. This year, as you can see right there, 90.5 pass rush grade, one of the highest at the Power 5 level, had multi-pressures in every single game played. So I wasn't too surprised at all whatsoever. Because, like you said, this was one of our favorite transfer additions from this past offseason. I thought this was an absolute home run for both parties involved. And, even too, I would put him in the first round with Jaquan Brisker. I think he's that good of a player. I think he has a very high floor to make an immediate impact right away for an NFL team. So, I think what they got from him is awesome. And I think Arnold Ebiketie, it still blows my mind that I'm saying this, but I still think he's an underrated player. I don't think he's getting enough recognition for how great he was making the jump from the group of five to the Power 5.
You keep answering my questions before I ask him, because that's something I've been watching as far as you're right, a technical pass rusher. He's surpassed everything I've seen at Penn State. And there have been some Shaka Toney for what he is an excellent technical pass rusher, and Ebiketie is that plus the size. So you're saying you would put him in the first round as an edge rusher. Is there a part of his game that NFL teams won't like, that they may disagree with you, and he might be maybe not a first round pick, but somewhere in that top 50?
Yeah, I think, the biggest thing is just how strong the position is this year.
Mm-hmm.
You look at, I remember I did a mock draft probably like 3, 4 weeks ago, and that was the toughest decision with all these edge defenders. Like, man, I'm leaving some guys out of the first round that, maybe last year they'd be in the conversation for the first or second off the board at the position. That's how stacked this is. So I think it's just going to be, pick your poison. What are you really looking for? And with Ebiketie, I just think with the consistency, and the technical refinement that he already has. And, I think for teams that have a pressing need, and again, I will say, you probably should never go into any draft, especially in round one or really any round, and look for need right away. You should always just go best player available. But I do think that Arnold Ebiketie, at least for the first 3 years, looking at this draft class, through the next 3 years, I think he will be considered, one of the top 32 players, for all the reasons I just stated earlier.
Yeah, and his play this year has opened my eyes. So I want to ask you this question that I didn't know I was going to be asking at the beginning of the season. Rank these players as prospects from Penn State: Yetur Gross-Matos, Odafe Oweh, Arnold Ebiketie. Where does he rank among Penn State's best edge rushers they put in the NFL? And I'm leaving Micah Parsons off intentionally because he technically was a linebacker.
Yeah, man, that's so interesting. I would probably say Arnold Ebiketie, and then Odafe Oweh, and then Yetur Gross-Matos. Yetur Gross-Matos,
Yep.
I wasn't too high on. I think I was a little bit lower than the consensus. And even Oweh, too, I think he's exceeded my expectations right now. I thought he went to a great situation
Yep.
in Baltimore. But I was just a little bit concerned at just how raw of a player he really was at Penn State. And, I think I talked with you, too, maybe about this before, but just like the production he had, too. I mean, most of that production in 2020 came against Indiana in week 8 or whatever when they started their season, because Indiana's tackles are really, really bad. And, the rest of the year it was kind of spotty, but he's been exceeding my expectations. So he's been great. But as far as, pure prospects, ignoring what they've done in the NFL, I would definitely go Ebiketie, and then Oweh, and then Yetur Gross-Matos.
Because Ebiketie is the blend of what you're looking for from a physical and a technical standpoint. I'm going to get to something about Odafe Oweh a little bit later, with a guy that has a bit of a decision to make this offseason. But before that, I want to round out with Penn State's possibly the best player, but the guy that I think there might be the most disagreement about, and I think you know where we're going with Jahan Dotson. The raw numbers, the kind of basic stats, receptions, yards, touchdowns, are phenomenal. Does the PFF grading and does his play match up to that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think so. And, I do think that calling him the wide receiver one might be a little bit of a stretch. I know that was a little bit of a thought early on in the season in some, draft analyst circles, but I do think he's a first round player. That's for sure. I mean, you look at his receiving grade, 87.2, some of the best ball skills in college football. That really stands out when watching. It really jumps off the screen there. Only a couple of drops for the season. And, for really being the engine of that passing offense, the go-to guy with, over 130 targets, close to that. It's truly exceptional what he did. And I think the biggest thing for me, when I was looking at this wide receiver class entering the season, I was looking at, the athleticism and everything in which Jahan Dotson, it's been remarkable how much he's kind of improved from a speed and explosiveness standpoint. Even too from a route running perspective, I think he's one of the best route runners in college football, pairing with those ball skills he has. So, early on in his career, he didn't really have that, trump card athletically where, he can get by because he has this trait.
Yeah.
But I do think that, their strength and conditioning program has definitely helped his speed and built up his explosiveness greatly, and that showed this past season.
So what is, knowing how big he is with 185 pounds and 5'11", and not the prototype size, but having, I think, every other skill of a wide receiver one outside of just the size, what is the number, I'd say, in the 3-cone drill to show that explosiveness and agility, and then the 40 time he needs to put up to put his name into contention for being another first-round draft pick from Penn State potentially?
That's a good question. I mean, I think, the way we're kind of trending, we're kind of going away from those numbers because
Mm.
I will say, like, the combine aspect of it, it's very propped up and everybody thinks it's a big deal what they do on the field. But at the end of the day, the whole event is for the player interviews. But I do think that if he does, if he hits in the 4.4s and, I think that's going to do him. I don't think anyone's going to have any concern. I think, the only thing you can take away from the on-field stuff, let's say like the combine, is if a player posts a very, very concerning number, and then that's when you might have to go back and say, okay, wait a minute,
So
are we
you don't
absolutely sure
think
about
Jahan
this?
is going to put up any concerning numbers then, as far as
No, I don't think
numbers that
so.
you would have to go back and look and see if there's any difference?
No, I don't think so at all. I mean, I think the consensus will be he will be a top 32 player. I think he's going to be a first round pick. And it kind of goes back to, I was talking about earlier with Evan Katie. It's just kind of, pick your poison. What do you really value at the position? Because there's some very different wide receiver prospects, I will say, that are kind of in that first round conversation, whether it's, Drake London, Traylon Burks, Jahan Dotson. I mean, those guys are very different players. Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, very different. All of those guys are, very unique in what they can offer. So it depends what you're really looking for there. So, from my perspective, I don't really see, I was concerned, when looking at him before this season, from an athleticism perspective, did he kind of have it to really make it in the NFL? And also the size factor paired with that. That was a big
Yeah.
concern. But this past year, he's shown to me that I do think he has greatly improved, from a physically standpoint. So I'm not concerned about the size. I'm not concerned about the athleticism. I don't think he's going to post any concerning numbers at all whatsoever, whether it's the 40 or the 3-cone or pro agility.
Penn State could potentially have 3 first-round draft picks, and they went 7-5 this season. That's why we started with Sean Clifford. I want to wrap up with a guy that is a really interesting situation in Jesse Luketa, where some draft analysts and some draft people have talked about him as a potential top 100 pick. I think in a way that's similar to Odafe Oweh, where my evaluation of Oweh was his hands are so good against the run. What's stopping him from using his hands that way against pass rushers? And the same thing with Jesse Luketa. He is, to me, an elite run defender, and he's a guy that can shed blocks really well. What is stopping him from translating those skills to pass rushing? So when you look at his potential and his size and his production, what do you think he should do? Do you think he should stay and work on that? Or do you think he should go to the NFL and test the waters as right now a hybrid guy that is a very good run defender with not a lot of production as a pass rusher?
Yeah, I mean, if he did enter the NFL draft, I probably wouldn't touch him in the first, couple of days. But I do think he'd be an intriguing flyer just because he does have the tools to get there. But I do think he can make himself a heck of a lot of money if he does return, because I do think he has the traits to develop into something really, really good and really help his draft stock there. Even too, like he did struggle at off ball back in 2020. But this past year, he didn't play off ball a lot, but in the couple of games where he did have to step in and play in the box there, when he did, kind of down the stretch there, he did have some snaps in the box. I thought he played, significantly better. He looked better when he was in the box, but like you said, the pass rushing, production it was not there. It was very poor. He only had, a sub 70 pass rush grade for the season. But from a run defense perspective, like you said, very strong, 83.9. And so I do think that he has the traits and the tools to, very, very much and greatly improve that pass rush production with another year returning back to the collegiate level. And so I would probably say I personally I hope he does, because I think it would be a good thing for Penn State's defense. It would be a good thing for him. But if he does declare, I wouldn't just automatically rule him out to not being a productive NFL player at all whatsoever. I just think it would probably take him a little bit more time to get there than some other players.
I kept you a couple minutes longer than I meant to, because I always love having smart football conversations. And when I want to do that, I bring in Anthony Treash of PFF. Thanks for coming on the show and giving us your insight.
Of course, man. Thank you for having me.
That'll do it today for the BWI Daily Edition. Don't forget, coming up on Monday, we'll be back. And then after the January 1st, after you have your pork and your sauerkraut if you're in Pennsylvania, we will have, after the bowl game, the BWI Live show against Arkansas. Excuse me. We were talking about Auburn earlier. Against Arkansas in the Outback Bowl. So stay tuned for all of that. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr. Talk to you later.